Imagine a sea surface more than 200 million years ago. The water darkens as it deepens, light streaks into bands. Beneath, a body as long as a large bus glides by. It's not a whale, it's not a dinosaur, it's an ichthyosaur, or fish lizard. And in this group, Shastasaurus is always mentioned for a very clear reason. Their size reached the unbelievable threshold. But fossils still compel you to believe. When you read Shastasaurus 21 meters long, you are almost certainly reading about a giant specimen from Canada, so famous that it is displayed as the world's largest marine reptile at the Royal Tyrrell Museum. This museum explicitly names the exhibit Shastasaurus sicaniensis. Guinness World Records also uses Shastasaurus sicaniensis as a prominent example for the marine reptiles record, estimated at 21 meters. Meanwhile, some phylogenetic studies group this 21-meter specimen into the Shastasaurus group, i.e. Shastasaurus sicaniensis. Therefore, if you want to write and speak correctly, you need to accept a fact. The same giant animal, but the genus name can change with each study. The original Shastasaurus originated in California. In 1895, paleontologist J.C. Merriam named Shastasaurus pacificus based on bone fragments found in Shasta County. UCMP documented Merriam receiving bones from the finder, identifying them as an ichthyosaur-like marine reptile, and then wanting to return to the site for further excavation. The problem is, the type specimen of Shastasaurus is quite fragmented. Many things you'd want to know, like head shape, teeth, body proportions, are not clearly visible. A review of fossils in British Columbia also stated directly both the genus Shastasaurus and the family Shastasauridae were once difficult to define due to fragmented type specimens, so the understanding of them was influenced by other, better specimens found later. By the end of the Triassic period, ichthyosaurs were no longer just dolphin-like creatures. They diversified in size and lifestyle. The Shastasaurid group stood out for having extremely large species. A PLOS One article on giant ichthyosaurs in England also noted that Shastasaurids appeared from the Ladinian, Middle Triassic, and lasted at least until the Rhaetian, Late Triassic, and the most diverse period fell within the Carnian. Simply put, during the time of Shastasaurus and its relatives, the ocean was spacious enough to support bodies over 20 meters long. Another important piece came from China. In 2011, a PLOS One study described a Shastasaurid ichthyosaur with a small head, short snout, and entirely lacking teeth. Then used morphology to argue that Shastasaurus, as they defined it, might be a suction feeder, meaning it fed by suction. This study also pulled the giant specimen Shastasaurus sicaniensis into the same clade as Shastasaurus pacificus and Guanlingsaurus liangae, proposing to apply the genus name Shastasaurus to that entire group. Here are 2 points you should keep. First, Shastasaurus in many modern writings is not just the one from California, but an entire group of Shastasaurids with very unusual shapes. Second, the squid suction hypothesis originated from species with short snouts and lost teeth, not from a complete giant skeleton. Now back to the 21-meter star. The scientific paper officially describing this specimen in 2004 named it Shastasaurus sicaniensis and estimated its length to be about 21 meters. The Royal Tyrrell Museum recounts that the specimen was discovered along the Sicani Chief River in northeastern British Columbia, and its size and remote location made excavation very difficult. Guinness World Records details the collection time of the holotype in the Pardnett Formation between 1997-2000 and also gives the figure of 21 meters. This is why many introductions call it the largest marine reptile ever found, because it was both very long and had enough material to create a room-filling display. Rather than just a few jaw fragments, you need to understand how people go from bones to the figure of 21 meters. With giant fossils, you rarely have a complete skeleton from head to tail. Researchers must rely on the sequence of vertebrae, ribs, shoulder bones, and then compare proportions with related ichthyosaurs that have more complete skeletons. In a popular science interview, Dean Lomax stated that this 21-meter specimen is about 40 to 50% complete, making its length estimate more reliable compared to specimens with only a few jaw sections. That is the big difference between one that is 21 meters long and one that could be over 25 meters long, the certainty of the measurement. Shastasaurus and giant Shastasaurids don't look like the typical ichthyosaurs from the Jurassic period that you often see in illustrations. Many species in this group have heads small relative to their bodies. Some had short snouts and significantly reduced teeth, even lacking them entirely. Their bodies could be very slender, and their rib cages, though large, were relatively thin compared to their length. That creates a contrasting image to what you might typically think. A predator over 20 meters long, but without jaws full of large, crocodile-like teeth. It was precisely from the small head and toothless morphology that the suction-feeding hypothesis emerged. If you look at a sperm whale or a beaked whale, you'll see they can be very large, but feed primarily on squid. They don't need to tear flesh with large teeth. They approach, open their mouths, create negative pressure in their oral cavity and throat, then suck the prey in. The 2011 PLS-1 study applied similar logic to Shastasaurus, according to the clade they constructed, explicitly interpreting it as a suction feeder consuming shell-less cephalopods and fish. In this interpretation, giant but eating small is not at all strange. A large body helps travel far, dive deep, and store energy. Small prey ensures stable feeding if the entire sea is full of squid. But you also need to look at the debate, as it directly affects the statement, "they suck water into their mouths." In 2013, a paper describing a juvenile Guanlingsaurus specimen showed its hyoid bone was smaller than expected by the strong suction hypothesis. At the same time, a popular analysis by National Geographic reiterated that the idea of ichthyosaurs slurping squid had been questioned, as anatomical data was not deemed sufficient to conclude they truly sucked like beaked whales. In summary, you can still correctly say this: there is a serious hypothesis that some Shastasaurids, often grouped near Shastasaurus, fed by suction and consumed squid. But the extent of how strong the suction is and whether all Shastasaurus were like that remains a point of debate. For the 21-meter specimen in Canada specifically, you need to be even more careful. This specimen is famous for its size and display, but it doesn't provide a complete skull like many smaller ichthyosaurs. Many inferences about its diet are still based on relatives, on the general morphology of Shastasaurids, and on the lack of evidence for large, tearing teeth. Therefore, if you want to write truthfully, you should use sentence structures like "it is likely," a strong hypothesis, existing evidence suggests. You avoid asserting as if Shastasaurus's stomach full of squid has been found. Regardless of how it fed, Shastasaurus was still an air-breathing animal. It had to surface periodically. With a body tens of meters long, its pace of life was very different from smaller predators. It didn't need to dart continuously. It could cruise, maintain a moderate speed, and then only accelerate for short bursts to catch prey. A large body also helps stabilize body temperature in water and reduces heat loss cost compared to smaller creatures, a kind of advantage seen in modern whales. This is a comparison of biological mechanisms, not to say that ichthyosaurs are whales. An interesting point is that ichthyosaurs achieved large sizes very early in their evolutionary history. A 2021 science paper on an early giant ichthyosaur emphasized that reaching large size happened very quickly, just a few million years after ichthyosaurs first appeared. This helps you put Shastasaurus into proper context. It wasn't a lucky accident that appeared once. It was the peak of a large body size trend within the ichthyosaur group, especially Shastasaurids, in the Triassic oceans. So, is Shastasaurus truly the largest ever found? If you mean the most famous specimen, 21 meters long, displayed and recognized by Guinness as a record example, then that statement is still true in the way many public sources use it. But if you mean largest in all cases, then you must update. In 2024, PLOS One announced Ichthyotitan sevenensis from England, based on two very large jaw fragments, and the authors suggest it is probably the largest marine reptile officially described, with an estimated length of up to 25 meters. The Natural History Museum also wrote that this species could reach about 25 meters, but they emphasized that this is still an estimate because the fossils are very fragmentary. In other words, the 21M is still a very strong figure because it's based on a relatively complete specimen. 25M is currently a very large candidate, but based on jawbones, so the certainty is completely different. Another statement you presented is they primarily ate squid and small fish. For the toothless Shastasaurid clade, this is biologically plausible and was directly stated in the 2011 suction-feeding hypothesis. But for all Shastasaurus in both broad and narrow senses, you cannot be sure that all species shared the same diet. Even among close relatives, classification changes. Some species were once grouped into Shastasaurus and later separated, as each new specimen revealed differences. When classification is still changing, assigning a fixed diet type to the entire genus can easily be oversimplified. If you want to maintain a cinematic yet truthful spirit, you can stick to a few definite images. One is the large hall at the Royal Tyrrell Museum, where the colossal skeleton lies like a stranded ship. Second is the excavation scene in remote British Columbia, as the museum explicitly stated that this was a large and hard-to-access specimen. Third is the scientific context. In 2004, it was described as Shonisaurus and estimated at 21 mem. In 2011, a group proposed reclassifying it to Shastasaurus. And even today, you still see both names used in parallel, depending on the author. These details create a sense of real life more than any exaggerated description. Finally, a conclusion without exaggeration. Shastasaurus offers a simple lesson on how to interpret fossils. The 21-meter figure carries weight because it comes with a skeleton large enough to be mounted and compared. The squid suction hypothesis is compelling because it explains a body type with lost teeth and a small head, but it still requires more anatomical and comparative evidence to be finalized. And the statement largest is always one that must be updated with the new discoveries, because just one more colossal jaw fragment appearing can change the order again.